The first scream came before anyone even knew something had gone wrong. It tore through the Whitmore estate like glass shattering, sharp, sudden, and then terrifyingly silent. Nathaniel Whitmore was on the third floor of his own home, finishing a call with his board of directors, when the sound hit him. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He dropped the phone mid-sentence and ran. By the time he reached the top of the grand staircase, the sight below him stopped him cold. His mother, Margaret Whitmore, 64 years old, sharp-tongued, iron-willed, and the single most important person in his life, was crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. Her hand was pressed against the marble floor. Her walking cane lay 3 steps above her, as if it had been knocked away before she fell. And standing at the top of the stairs, one hand pressed over her mouth in apparent horror, was Vivian Cole, his fiancée, 29 years old, the woman he had planned to marry in 6 weeks. "She fell," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling. "Nathaniel, I was right behind her. She lost her footing. I couldn't." Nathaniel was already moving, taking the stairs 2 at a time, kneeling beside his mother. Margaret was conscious. That was the first mercy. But she was in pain, real pain, and her eyes when they found his face were confused. "I didn't fall," she said. Just those 3 words. Quiet. Certain. And then her eyes closed. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. The diagnosis came 3 hours later at the hospital. A fractured wrist, 2 bruised ribs, and a hairline fracture at the base of her left hip. She would recover fully. She was lucky. But Margaret Whitmore did not believe in luck. And neither, after that night, did Nathaniel. Back at the estate, after the ambulance left, Vivian sat in the main sitting room with a glass of water she hadn't touched. The household staff had retreated to their quarters. The house was quiet in the way that houses get quiet after something terrible, except for one small sound. From behind the half-open door of the adjoining laundry room came the soft, rhythmic sound of a child humming. Rosa Delgado, 26 years old, the estate's live-in housekeeper, had been working at the Whitmore house for 3 years. She was quiet, efficient, and almost invisible in the way good household staff are trained to be. She never spoke unless spoken to, never offered opinions, never lingered. But her daughter Lily was 3 years old. And Lily was everything Rosa was not. Loud, observant, curious, and absolutely incapable of pretending she hadn't seen something. Lily had been sitting in the corner of the upstairs hallway, playing with her wooden block set when it happened. She had seen everything. Nathaniel did not sleep that night. He sat beside his mother's hospital bed until 4 in the morning, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, replaying the moment he had arrived at the top of those stairs. The image refused to leave him. Vivian's hand over her mouth. Her trembling voice. Her tears, which had come quickly and dried just as quickly. He loved Vivian. Or he had believed he did. 38 years old. And he had never let anyone close enough to matter until her. She had been patient with his distance, warm in ways he hadn't known he needed. And he had built a future around her in his mind without quite realizing he was doing it. But his mother had said, "I didn't fall." And Margaret Whitmore did not say things she didn't mean. When morning came, he returned to the estate. Vivian was already awake, dressed perfectly, seated at the kitchen island with coffee. She looked up when he entered, and her expression shifted immediately into concern. "How is she? Is she going to be okay?" "Nathaniel, I've been sick with worry all night." "She's stable," he said. He sat down across from her. She said she didn't fall. Vivian's expression didn't change exactly. But something behind her eyes did. A small, almost undetectable recalibration. "She's 64, Vivian said gently. "And she hit her head. She probably doesn't remember clearly." "Nathaniel, I was standing right there. I watched it happen." Her cane slipped on the edge of the step and she went forward. "I tried to grab her but I wasn't fast enough." It was a perfect answer. reasonable, compassionate, full of the kind of careful detail that made it feel true. He nodded slowly. I'm sure you're right. But he wasn't sure. And Vivian, who was very good at reading people, knew that. By that afternoon, the story had taken shape. At least the version that Vivian began telling, quietly, strategically, to anyone who asked. Margaret was elderly. Margaret had always been slightly unsteady on those stairs. Margaret had refused to let Nathaniel install a lift or grip rails, out of stubbornness. It was a tragedy, but not a mystery. These things happened. The household staff nodded and said nothing. That was their job. Rosa Delgado also said nothing. She prepared meals, laundered linens, and kept Lily close. But that evening, while Rosa was folding towels in the laundry room, Lily tugged on her sleeve. "Mama," Lily said. She used the tone she used when something was serious, the one that was too solemn for a 3-year-old's face. The pretty lady pushed Grandma. Rosa went very still. "Lily." Her voice was careful. "What did you say?" "The pretty lady." Lily pointed toward the main hall, in the general direction of wherever Vivian happened to be. She pushed Grandma's stick with her foot. And then Grandma fell down the stairs. Rosa put down the towels. She sat on the floor right there in the laundry room, and she pulled her daughter into her lap and looked at her face. Her completely serious, completely unafraid, completely certain face, and felt her stomach drop. "Did anyone else see?" Rosa asked quietly. Lily thought about it. Then she shook her head. Rosa held her daughter for a long time after that, thinking about what to do. The problem with knowing the truth was what it cost to tell it. Rosa had worked for the Whitmores for 3 years. She had been hired by Margaret herself, not by Nathaniel's previous assistant, not through an agency, but by Margaret, who had interviewed her in the kitchen over tea and asked her exactly one question. "Are you honest?" Rosa had said yes. And she had meant it. But honesty had a price that changed depending on what you had to lose. Rosa had Lily. She had a small room in the East Wing. She had a salary that made it possible to send money home to her mother in Guadalajara. She had no savings, no backup plan, and no family in the city. If Vivian became Mrs. Whitmore and Rosa reported what Lily had seen, Vivian would have her removed. That wasn't paranoia. That was simple math. But Margaret Whitmore was lying in a hospital bed with a fractured hip. Rosa put Lily to bed that night, kissed her forehead, and didn't sleep. 2 days later, Nathaniel brought his mother home. The recovery process was set up in the ground floor suite. No more stairs for the foreseeable future. Physiotherapist was scheduled. Private nurse was hired. The house rearranged itself around Margaret's new reality with the quiet efficiency of wealth. Vivian was flawless throughout. She organized everything. She managed the schedules, spoke warmly with the medical staff, and appeared at Margaret's doorway twice a day with fresh flowers and carefully chosen conversation. Margaret endured her. That was the word. Not accepted. Not welcomed. Endured. On the 3rd day, when Vivian had left the room, Margaret looked at Rosa, who was adjusting the window curtains. "She's lying," Margaret said. Rosa said nothing. "I know what happened," Margaret continued. "I felt the cane go first. Someone hit it or kicked it just before I went over. I didn't slip. I was pushed." Rosa kept her eyes on the curtains. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said carefully, "you should rest." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know something." It wasn't a question. Rosa smoothed the curtain fabric and did not answer. That night, Rosa found Nathaniel alone in his study. He was standing at the window, not working, just standing, looking at the garden with the particular stillness of a man who was trying very hard not to think about something he couldn't stop thinking about. Rosa knocked on the open door. He turned. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Whitmore." "Rosa. It's fine." "What is it?" She had rehearsed this. She had thought about how to say it carefully, how to frame it so it was Lily's observation and not her accusation, so it couldn't be turned back on her. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was simpler. "My daughter was in the hallway when your mother fell." The room became very quiet. Nathaniel turned from the window fully now. His attention sharpened to a single point. "Lily. She's 3, Rosa said. But she told me what she saw. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't sure she meant it. She's told me the same thing 3 times now, exactly the same way, and she doesn't change the story. She doesn't embellish. She just says what she saw." Nathaniel's voice was steady, but only barely. "What did she see?" Rosa told him. The silence that followed was the longest of Rosa's professional life. He didn't confront Vivian that night. He understood in some cold and functional corner of his mind that he needed to be certain before he did anything. Because if he was wrong, if Lily had misunderstood, if a 3-year-old's perception of a chaotic moment had translated into something that wasn't accurate, he would destroy his engagement and wound the woman who had waited 3 years for him on the basis of a child's incomplete view from a hallway floor. He needed to know. The Whitmore estate had a security system. It had cameras at every exterior entrance, in the garage, at the front gates. Standard coverage for a property this size. What it did not have, because Margaret had refused it, was interior surveillance. "I will not live in a monitored house," she had said. "If you want to watch your staff, hire better staff." So there was no footage. There was only Lily. Nathaniel thought about this for 48 hours. He ran his company, attended his meetings, sat across from Vivian at dinner, and watched her with different eyes. Eyes that were looking for something he'd never thought to look for before. He found it on the second evening. They were talking about the wedding. The florist had sent revised proposals, and Vivian was going through them with the light, pleasant energy of a woman who was very comfortable with her position. And at one point she mentioned Margaret. "I do hope she'll be recovered enough to enjoy the ceremony," Vivian said, not looking up from the florist's portfolio. "I know she and I have had our moments, but she is your mother. I want her to feel included." It was a generous thing to say. It was exactly the right thing to say. And Nathaniel realized, watching her, that Vivian always said exactly the right thing. That there had never been a moment, not one, not in 3 years, where she had said something unguarded, something reactive, something real. He had mistaken that for composure. Now he wondered if it was calculation. On the 3rd day he went to see Lily. Rosa brought her daughter to the small sitting room off the kitchen. Lily was wearing a yellow dress and carrying a stuffed rabbit. She looked at Nathaniel with the frank, unimpressed assessment that very small children give to very important adults, and then she sat down on the small sofa and settled her rabbit beside her. Nathaniel sat across from her. Rosa stood near the door. "Hi, Lily," he said. "Hi," she said. "Your mom tells me you were upstairs the other day, playing with your blocks." Lily nodded. "Did you see something happen?" Lily looked at her rabbit for a moment, then back at him. "The pretty lady pushed Grandma's stick." "Which pretty lady?" Lily pointed, immediately without hesitation, toward the main part of the house. "The one with the long hair. The one who wears the sparkly ring. Vivian's engagement ring. A 3-carat solitaire." Lily had apparently noticed. "What did she do with the stick?" Nathaniel kept his voice gentle. "She pushed it with her shoe." Lily demonstrated, moving her small foot in a sideways kick. "Like that. And then Grandma fell down the stairs and made a big noise." "Did the pretty lady try to help Grandma?" Lily thought about this very seriously. "No," she said finally. She looked down at Grandma and then she put her hand on her mouth like this. Lily pressed her own small palm over her mouth. And then she made a face like she was crying, but she wasn't crying. Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. "Like she was pretending?" he asked. Lily nodded, already distracted by her rabbit's ear. "Like pretending." He hired an investigator that afternoon. Not to investigate Vivian directly, but to investigate the week before the accident. It took the investigator 4 days to find what Nathaniel was beginning to suspect existed. Margaret Whitmore, 2 weeks before her fall, had made an appointment with her personal attorney. The purpose? A revision to her estate planning documents. Specifically, she had called to discuss adjusting the trust structure in a way that would limit what any future spouse of Nathaniel's could claim in the event of divorce. She had not told Nathaniel. She had planned to, eventually, but she had not yet. Vivian had a source inside Margaret's attorney's office. A paralegal she'd cultivated, quietly over months, through small gifts and occasional lunches that never appeared on any record. She had known about the trust revision before it was finalized. She had known that if Margaret survived long enough to sign those documents, Vivian's financial position in this marriage would be significantly different from what she had planned for. The investigator laid all of this out in a 40-page report on a Tuesday afternoon. Nathaniel read it twice, alone in his study, and then he sat very still for a very long time. He went to see his mother. Margaret was sitting up in her recovery suite, doing a crossword puzzle. She looked up when Nathaniel came in, read his face immediately, and set the puzzle aside. He sat beside her bed and told her everything. The investigator's report. What Rosa had said. What Lily had told him. Margaret listened without speaking. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment. "I told you I didn't fall," she said. "I know. You didn't believe me." "I wanted to," he said. "I'm sorry." Margaret was quiet. Then, in a voice softer than Nathaniel was used to hearing from her, "She nearly had me convinced I'd imagined it. I started to wonder, at my age maybe I did slip. Maybe I was confused. It's a terrible thing to doubt your own certainty." Nathaniel took her hand. "A 3-year-old set me straight," Margaret said after a moment. And something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. "I'd like to thank her properly." What would you have done in Nathaniel's position? Would you have trusted what a child said? Or would you have looked for a reason not to believe it? Tell me in the comments because the answer says a lot. He called Vivian to his study that evening. She came in looking composed as always. She had dressed well. She always dressed well. And she brought with her the particular energy of someone who has been waiting for a conversation she believes she can control. She sat across from his desk. He remained standing. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked at her. And in that silence, something shifted in Vivian's composure, a hairline fracture, barely visible. "The paralegal at Harrington and Associates," Nathaniel said. "You've been having lunch with her." The fracture spread. "Nathaniel. My mother's attorney's office," he continued. "You knew about the trust revision. I don't know what you're." "Vivian." His voice was quiet. Not angry. Worse than angry. Completely certain. "Lily saw what you did." The composure didn't just crack. Dissolved. For just one moment, before she gathered herself back together. He saw what was underneath it. Not remorse. Not fear exactly. Calculation. She was already trying to figure out if there was an angle she hadn't played. "She's 3 years old," Vivian said, recovering. "Whatever she thinks she saw." "She demonstrated how you kicked the cane," Nathaniel said. "She described the expression on your face afterward. The hand over your mouth. The eyes that looked like crying but weren't." Vivian said nothing. "My mother could have died," he said. Still nothing. "Get out of my house," Nathaniel said. "Tonight. Don't take anything that wasn't yours before you came here. Your lawyer will hear from mine in the morning." Vivian left the Whitmore estate at 9:17 that evening. She walked out the front door with a single overnight bag, got into her car, and drove away without looking back. Nathaniel stood in the entrance hall and watched the taillights disappear at the gate, and he felt nothing for a moment. A strange, hollow nothing, and then slowly a kind of enormous relief that surprised him. He hadn't known how much weight he'd been carrying until it was gone. The formal confrontation happened 10 days later, and it did not happen quietly. At Nathaniel's request, his attorney arranged a meeting. Vivian brought her own legal counsel. They convened in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore Group's headquarters, neutral territory, except that nothing connected to Nathaniel Whitmore was truly neutral. Present in the room, Nathaniel, his attorney, Vivian, her attorney, and, at Nathaniel's specific insistence, Rosa Delgado. Vivian looked across the table at Rosa and said nothing. But the look was enough. The attorney laid out the case. The paralegal's communications. The timing of Vivian's knowledge about the trust revision, and the timing of Margaret's fall. The physical evidence, Rosa's testimony, Lily's account, and a detail from the medical report that had initially been overlooked. A small scuff mark on the lower portion of Margaret's cane, consistent with a lateral impact, not a fall. Vivian's attorney opened his mouth twice and closed it again each time. Vivian maintained composure through most of it. Right up until the moment Nathaniel placed a photograph on the table. An enlarged still from a neighbor estate's exterior camera. Not close enough to catch the interior of the staircase, but close enough to capture the driveway and entrance, and a timestamp, and something else. Vivian's silhouette in the upstairs window, moving away from the staircase landing, 20 seconds before the first sound of the fall. 20 seconds. Not the frantic rush of someone who had just witnessed an accident. Calm, deliberate walk away. Vivian's composure finally broke. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just tired. The effort of holding the performance together simply ran out. She was going to ruin everything, Vivian said. Quietly. Almost to herself. She had already decided she didn't want me there. She was going to cut me out before I even had a chance to. To what? Nathaniel said. Vivian looked at him. Really looked at him. Maybe for the first time without the performance layered over it. To be safe, she said. And for just a moment, Nathaniel almost felt something like pity. Because he understood in that moment that this was what Vivian had been running from her whole life. Not toward him, but toward the safety she believed he represented. That understanding didn't excuse anything. It didn't erase what she had done. But it made her human in a way that was somehow harder to be angry at. He looked away. You'll make full restitution for my mother's medical costs, his attorney said. And you will sign a non-disclosure agreement that prohibits any public statement about this family. In exchange, we will not pursue criminal charges. It was a generous settlement. Vivian knew it. Her attorney knew it. Just sign. 3 weeks later, Margaret Whitmore walked across the entrance hall of the estate on her own 2 feet, with her cane, without holding the railing. She had refused the physiotherapist's suggestion that she wait another week. She was 64 years old and she had survived a fractured hip and a woman who had tried to make her doubt her own mind, and she was not going to wait another week to walk across her own floor. Nathaniel watched from the doorway. Rosa was nearby, having just finished setting the dining room table for the first family dinner at home since the accident. And Lily was sitting on the entrance hall floor, exactly as she had been sitting on that upstairs landing 3 weeks ago, blocks arranged in front of her, completely absorbed in her own world. Margaret stopped in front of her. Lily looked up. "Hello," Margaret said. "Hello," Lily said. "I understand," Margaret said very formally, "that you saw what happened to me." Lily considered this. "You fell down the stairs," she said. "I was pushed," Margaret corrected gently. Lily nodded. "I know. I saw." Margaret looked at this small person for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you." Lily studied her with the serious, uncomplicated eyes of someone who has not yet learned to be anything other than what she is. "You're welcome," she said. And then she went back to her blocks. Nathaniel came to stand beside his mother. They watched Lily arrange her wooden shapes into a structure that made sense only to her. She's remarkable, Margaret said. She's 3, Nathaniel said. Yes, Margaret agreed. She has no idea why telling the truth is complicated for most people. She just told it. We should all be so lucky. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. I should have believed you immediately. When you said you didn't fall. Margaret made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You believed a beautiful woman instead of your stubborn old mother. I'm not surprised. I'm only glad someone in this house had uncorrupted vision. She looked down at Lily again. Make sure that child gets a proper education, Margaret said. She's Rosa's daughter, Nathaniel said. Not mine too. Nathaniel. Margaret gave him the look she had been giving him since he was 8 years old. Find a way. That evening, Nathaniel sat across from Rosa in the small sitting room. Rosa looked like someone who had been waiting for consequences that hadn't arrived yet, composed but braced. You took a risk, Nathaniel said. Coming to me. Yes, Rosa said simply. You could have stayed quiet. It would have been safer for you. Yes, she said again. Why didn't you? Rosa thought about it for a moment. Because your mother asked me once in my interview if I was honest. And I said yes. And I meant it. Nathaniel was quiet. Then, Lily starts at Summerfield Academy in September. It's the best early education program in the city. The tuition and everything associated with it will be handled by the Whitmore family account. Rosa stared at him. Rosa, he said. You can argue with me about it or you can say thank you. One of those options wastes both of our time. Long pause. Thank you, Rosa said. Her voice was barely audible. Don't thank me, he said. Your daughter saw the truth and told it to someone who could do something with it. That has a value I can't calculate. She did more for my family in 30 seconds of honesty than most adults would have managed with 30 years of trying. 6 months later, Margaret Whitmore attended the opening of the Whitmore Family Foundation's new literacy center on the east side of the city. She was photographed at the ribbon-cutting ceremony with 2 people beside her. Her son, Nathaniel, 38 years old, who had learned something irrevocable about the difference between a performance of love and the real thing. And a small girl in a bright red dress, holding Margaret's free hand, who had no idea that she had changed the course of anything. Lily was more interested in the balloons. But Margaret held her hand very firmly, and looked at the cameras, and for once in her long life allowed herself to be photographed smiling. The paralegal was dismissed by the law firm. Vivian relocated to another city, as quietly as possible. The wedding vendors were notified and the deposits absorbed as the cost of a lesson Nathaniel did not regret paying for. He took 6 months before he returned to any version of a social life. He was patient with himself in a way he hadn't been before. He had learned that being certain about a person and being right about a person were not the same thing, and that the difference between them was worth taking time over. His mother told him this made him wiser. His mother also told him he was not allowed to take longer than a year, because she was 64 and would not wait forever for grandchildren. He told her that was an inappropriate thing to say. She told him to find a woman who was honest. He told her he knew. She told him to find one who was also kind. He said nothing to that, because he thought for the first time in a long time, that he might actually be beginning to know how to tell the difference. What struck me most about this story wasn't the betrayal. Betrayal is, unfortunately, not rare. What struck me was the simplicity of how the truth surfaced. Not from surveillance footage. Not from a private investigator hired on day one. Not from a confession. From a 3-year-old girl playing with wooden blocks on a hallway floor. Who had no reason to lie. Who didn't know what was at stake. Who just told her mother what she saw. The truth came from the one person in that house who had never learned to perform. If you're watching this and you have a child in your life, ask yourself, how often do we dismiss what they notice? How often do we explain away what they've seen because we assume our adult complexity must know better? Sometimes the clearest vision in the room belongs to someone who hasn't yet learned why seeing clearly is difficult. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? If you were Rosa, would you have spoken up? Or would the risk have been too great? And if you were Nathaniel, would you have believed your mother the first time? I read every single comment. Tell me where you're watching from, and let me know what part of this story hit you the hardest.